The morning began like any other, quiet enough to pass unnoticed. At Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle, the air carried the muted sounds of routine footsteps on the concrete paths, the distant chatter of visitors, the familiar rhythm of gates opening and closing. Caretakers moved through their schedules with practiced ease. Families paused at enclosures, phones raised, children tugging at sleeves. Nothing suggested that this day would fracture the ordinary, until Maya stepped forward. She was not a young gorilla. Her movements carried the weight of years, measured, deliberate, restrained by experience rather than weakness. Cradled against her chest was her infant Eli, no more than a few months old, his small fingers tangled in the dark fur beneath her chin. Mothers held their babies everywhere in the zoo across species and seasons. There was nothing unusual about that. What was unusual was where Maya went. Instead of retreating to the shaded corner of the enclosure where she usually rested, she approached the glass, slowly, intentionally. Her eyes did not wander. They fixed on the people beyond the barrier with an intensity that cut through the casual mood of the crowd. Visitors noticed the shift before they understood it. Conversations trailed off, phones lowered. There was a collective sense, subtle but unmistakable, that something had changed. Maya raised one hand and placed it flat against the glass. The sound was soft, barely audible, but the gesture landed with unsettling clarity. She did not pound. She did not display aggression. Her posture was upright, controlled, almost formal. Eli stirred against her chest, making a small sound, and Maya tightened her hold, her arm forming a protective arc around him. A woman standing closest to the enclosure froze. Margaret Lewis had come to the zoo that morning, the way she often did, alone, unhurried, seeking quiet rather than spectacle. A retired nurse in her early 70s, she had learned long ago to read distress in faces before words ever arrived. She had seen it in emergency rooms and hospital beds, in the eyes of mothers who knew something was wrong, long before monitors confirmed it. When Maya looked at her, Margaret felt it immediately. This was not curiosity. This was not confusion. This was urgency. Maya shifted her weight and lifted Eli higher, angling his small body toward the glass. His head lolled slightly, not with the loose abandon of sleep, but with a heaviness that felt wrong. Maya made a low sound, deep, controlled, threaded with tension. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was a call. People stepped back instinctively. Someone whispered, "Is she okay?" Another voice answered, "She's probably just showing the baby." But the explanations rang hollow even as they were spoken, because Maya did something no one expected. She extended her arms, not toward another gorilla, not toward safety, but toward the humans on the other side of the glass. For a moment, no one moved. The gesture was so profoundly out of place that it scrambled logic. Gorillas did not do this. Wild mothers did not offer their infants to strangers. Everything people thought they understood about animals insisted that this was either a mistake or a danger about to unfold. Zoo staff converged quickly, guided by instinct, sharpened through years of training. Rachel Morgan, the head zookeeper, reached the edge of the crowd and stopped short when she saw Maya's face. Rachel had worked with gorillas for nearly 2 decades. She had memorized the difference between posturing and panic, between dominance displays and stress responses. What she saw now did not fit any category she recognized. Maya's eyes were wide but not wild. Her breathing was steady, controlled with effort. This was not an animal losing control. This was an animal making a decision. Rachel raised a hand to signal calm, though she wasn't entirely sure who the gesture was for the visitors, her staff, or herself. Maya's gaze flicked toward her briefly, then returned to Margaret as if reaffirming a choice already made. Margaret's heart pounded. She had spent her life being trained to step forward when others stepped back, to trust the quiet signals that told her when time mattered. Yet this moment shattered every boundary she had ever known. The glass between them was thick, reinforced, designed precisely to prevent what was now unfolding. Maya pressed Eli closer to the barrier. Margaret took a step forward before she realized she was moving. The world narrowed to the space between a gorilla mother and a human woman, divided by a wall that suddenly felt less like protection and more like an obstacle. Margaret lifted her hands slowly, palms open, her movements careful, respectful. She did not touch the glass. She did not speak. She simply met Maya's eyes. What passed between them was wordless but unmistakable. a shared recognition of something fragile, something slipping. Behind them, visitors whispered urgently. Someone called for security. Someone else said they should move everyone away. Rachel felt the tension tighten around her chest as procedures and instincts collided. If Maya became agitated, protocols would activate. If she pressed harder, alarms would sound. The situation balanced on a razor's edge. Maya made another sound lower this time, almost strained. She adjusted Eli again, lifting him higher, his small body trembling slightly. His breathing was shallow, barely visible beneath the rise and fall of his chest. Shock rippled through the crowd as understanding began to form. This wasn't a display. This wasn't confusion. This was a mother who believed her baby was dying. Rachel felt it then, a cold certainty settling into her gut. Animals hid weakness. They endured pain in silence until survival demanded otherwise. For a gorilla mother to break instinct across every behavioral boundary meant the danger had already passed the point of endurance. Maya wasn't asking for attention. She was asking for help. Margaret's throat tightened. She had held countless infants in crisis over the years, memorizing the weight of fear that came when a mother knew something was wrong and no one else would listen yet. The feeling was unmistakable, universal. Around them, confusion reigned. People argued softly. Staff whispered into radios. Cameras recorded from a distance, capturing fragments without comprehension. No one knew what to do next, because in that moment, standing face to face with a gorilla mother offering her child to a stranger, the world's assumptions about animals' intelligence and trust began to unravel, and whatever was about to happen would not leave anyone unchanged. Margaret Lewis had learned over the course of a long life that true emergencies were rarely loud. They arrived quietly, often disguised as ordinary moments that only revealed their urgency to those willing to pay attention. In hospital rooms, it was the way a patient avoided eye contact. In hallways, it was the pause before a call button was pressed. And now, standing on a concrete path at Woodland Park Zoo, it was the way a gorilla mother held her child. Margaret did not remember the first time she came to the zoo alone. It had happened sometime after her husband passed, after the house grew too quiet and the days too long. She discovered that walking among animals steadied her in a way nothing else did. There was honesty there. No small talk, no pretending, just presence. She came often enough that faces began to feel familiar, keepers nodding in recognition, regular visitors exchanging polite smiles. She never crossed the line into thinking she belonged there. She was, after all, just a visitor, a witness, until that morning. When Maya's eyes found hers, Margaret felt the strange compression of time that accompanies recognition. Not recognition of a face, but of a state of being. She had seen that look before, in delivery rooms where complications turned joy into terror. In oncology wards, when a mother's voice changed because she already knew the answer she was about to hear. The look said, "I have tried everything I know how to do." Margaret's hands trembled slightly at her sides. She forced them still. Panic was contagious, and she had spent years learning how not to pass it on. Instead, she let herself breathe slow and steady, the way she had taught frightened patients to breathe when words failed them. She watched Maya carefully now, not as a spectacle, but as a mother watching another mother. The way Maya's arm curved around Eli was not casual. It was protective to the point of strain, muscles taut with effort. The baby's small body did not cling with the strength Margaret expected. His head rested too heavily against Maya's chest. His movements were minimal, almost reluctant. Margaret's chest tightened. She stepped closer to the glass, ignoring the murmurs around her. She was aware distantly of Rachel Morgan moving through the crowd of staff, whispering into radios. But those sounds felt secondary, blurred at the edges of her attention. Her focus remained fixed on the space between her and Maya. Margaret lifted one hand, slowly palm open, the universal gesture of non-threat she had used countless times with frightened children and disoriented patients. She did not touch the glass. She did not speak. She simply allowed herself to be seen. Maya's breathing hitched. It was subtle but unmistakable. A small disruption in rhythm, like the catch in a human sob that comes just before control is lost. Maya adjusted Eli again, angling him slightly as if trying to show Margaret something specific. Margaret understood then that this was not a request born of impulse. This was deliberation. Gorillas were not reckless with their young. Every instinct they possessed was designed to protect, to conceal weakness, to avoid exposure. For Maya to stand here offering her child to a world filled with noise and strangers meant she had already reached the conclusion Margaret herself dreaded most, that she could not fix this alone. Rachel arrived at Margaret's side, her presence calm but taut with concern. "Ma'am," she said, gently keeping her voice low, "I'm going to ask you to step back just a little." Margaret nodded but did not move. "I will," she said softly. "I just need a moment." Rachel hesitated. In her years as head zookeeper, she had learned to trust patterns data training. But she had also learned to trust moments like this, the ones that resisted categorization, that asked for judgment rather than protocol. She watched the exchange between woman and gorilla, and something in her shifted. "What do you see?" Rachel asked quietly. Margaret swallowed. "I see a mother who's already decided," she said, "and a baby who's running out of time." Rachel's jaw tightened. She looked back at Maya, at Eli's shallow breathing, at the strain in Maya's posture. Her professional instincts, sharpened by decades of experience, aligned suddenly with Margaret's human intuition. Something was very wrong. Around them, the crowd had grown restless. Some people were filming. Others argued in hushed tones about safety and rules. A man muttered that animals shouldn't be allowed so close to visitors. A woman whispered that this felt wrong to watch. Margaret barely heard them. Her curiosity now had teeth, not the idle curiosity of wanting to know what would happen next, but the urgent need to understand why. Why this gorilla? Why now? Why her? She searched Maya's face for aggression and found none. No bared teeth, no stiffening display, just focus, resolve, and beneath it, exhaustion. Margaret felt a swell of grief so sharp it surprised her. It was the grief of recognition, the understanding that suffering followed the same shape no matter the species. That desperation wore the same face everywhere. She remembered a young mother from years ago sitting in a plastic chair in an emergency room hallway, rocking a limp toddler and repeating the same sentence over and over, as if it were a spell. "Please help him. Please help him." Margaret had helped then. She could not help now. Not directly. The glass remained between them, immovable and final. But she could witness. She could listen. And sometimes she knew being taken seriously was the first step toward rescue. Maya made another low sound, more strained this time. Eli's small fingers twitched, then stilled. Rachel made a decision. She signaled to her staff, quick and precise. "Clear the area," she said quietly. "I want veterinary on standby. Full assessment. Now." The radios crackled to life. Margaret felt a surge of relief mixed with dread. Relief that someone else had seen it too. Dread of what the assessment might reveal. Her curiosity had sharpened into something heavier, a need to know whether this act of trust would be met with action or dismissed as coincidence. Maya watched the movement around her with wary intelligence. When staff began to reposition, when visitors were gently guided back, her gaze flicked once more to Margaret. There was no gratitude there, no expectation, only vigilance. Margaret placed her hand flat against the glass, at last matching Maya's earlier gesture. The barrier was cool beneath her palm, solid and unyielding. Maya mirrored the movement, her massive hand aligning almost perfectly with Margaret's through the transparent divide. The symmetry was startling. For a breathless moment, the world narrowed to two mothers, one human, one not standing on opposite sides of an invention meant to separate them, bound by the same unspoken fear. Margaret felt her curiosity deepen into something quieter and more dangerous. If an animal could assess a stranger, could weigh risk against necessity, could choose trust over instinct in the name of her child, what else did animals understand that humans had underestimated for far too long? She did not know what would happen next, but she knew with sudden and unshakable certainty that this was not a misunderstanding. It was a message, and the cost of ignoring it would be unbearable. The examination room was quieter than the enclosure had been. Once Maya and Eli were guided away from the glass and into the private medical wing, the noise of visitors faded into a distant hum. The walls here were neutral, designed to calm both animals and people, but the tension did not dissipate. It only changed shape, settling into something heavier and more deliberate. Rachel Morgan stood just outside the room, arms folded tightly across her chest, watching through the reinforced observation window. She had overseen countless medical checks over the years, routine blood draws, minor injuries, seasonal stress. This felt different, not urgent in the frantic sense, but loaded with consequence. Margaret Lewis waited on a bench nearby, hands clasped in her lap. She had been asked to remain for now, not as a participant, but as a witness. Rachel hadn't explained why she made that choice, only that something about Margaret's presence seemed to steady the situation. Margaret did not question it. She understood the value of being still when movement might complicate things. Maya sat on the exam platform with Eli pressed against her, her body angled protectively even as veterinarians moved carefully around them. She allowed their proximity, but her eyes tracked every hand, every instrument. This was not submission, it was calculation. The first signs appeared quickly. Eli's vital readings were inconsistent heart rate, fluctuating breathing, shallow and uneven. He was warm to the touch in a way that felt wrong, the heat not evenly distributed. One of the veterinarians frowned and adjusted the monitor, then checked again. Maya made a low sound, deep and resonant, vibrating through the room. Not aggressive, not panicked, a sound of recognition. Rachel felt her stomach drop. They began with Maya. Blood was drawn. Imaging followed. The process was methodical, professional, careful not to alarm. Yet as results began to populate the screen, the room shifted. The lead veterinarian leaned closer, scrolling back and forth, verifying numbers that did not align with expectation. "There's inflammation," she said slowly. "Significant. And this," she paused, tapping the screen. "This isn't consistent with anything we've been treating." Rachel stepped forward. "What do you mean?" "I mean, these markers don't belong here," the veterinarian replied. "They suggest prolonged exposure to something synthetic. Not environmental, not dietary." Margaret felt a chill crawl up her spine. Rachel's mind raced through inventory lists, treatment logs, feeding schedules. Everything was regulated. Everything was documented. There were protocols for every substance that entered an animal's body. Unless the documentation was wrong, they continued. The imaging revealed the next truth with brutal clarity. A mass, irregular and fast-growing, pressed against Maya's internal organs. Not benign, not incidental. The kind of growth that did not wait politely for discovery. Rachel stared at the screen, unable to look away. She had seen tumors before. This one told a different story. "This is aggressive," the veterinarian said. "And recent." Recent. That word echoed. Maya was older, yes, but she had been healthy, strong. Her last full checkup had shown no abnormalities. Rachel knew this because she had signed off on it herself. "So what changed?" Rachel asked quietly. The room did not answer. Margaret leaned forward, her voice careful. "What about toxins?" she asked. "Medication interactions?" The veterinarian nodded slowly. "That's what I'm concerned about." A review of Maya's blood revealed trace compounds that should not have been present at all. Experimental agents, unlisted, unapproved. The kind of substances that existed only in research labs, not in regulated zoological care. Rachel's hands clenched into fists. She excused herself and stepped into the adjacent office, pulling up Maya's medical records on a secured terminal. Every entry appeared clean, too clean, dosages recorded with precision, no deviations, no anomalies, which meant someone had taken the time to hide them. Rachel knew exactly who had authority over those files. Dr. Andrew Cole had joined the zoo's research division 6 months earlier, brought in under the banner of innovation. His credentials were impressive, his proposals were ambitious. He spoke passionately about advancing understanding of primate cognition, of pushing boundaries responsibly. Rachel had been cautious but cooperative. Research had its place. Ethics committees existed for a reason. She pulled up Cole's access logs. The timestamps told their own story. Late-night entries, repeated edits, files opened, altered, and closed without corresponding approvals. Data overwritten, then restored in ways that suggested intent rather than error. Rachel felt something cold settle behind her ribs. Back in the exam room, Maya shifted restlessly. Eli whimpered softly, the sound weak and thin. Maya's arm tightened around him, her gaze flicking between the veterinarians and the door, as if sensing that whatever was happening now would decide everything that came next. Margaret watched her and felt a surge of anger she hadn't expected. This was not nature failing a mother. This was interference. Rachel returned, her face set with a resolve that surprised even herself. She requested a full audit quietly, efficiently. She instructed the veterinary team to document everything in duplicate and secure copies off-site. When the veterinarian asked why Rachel met her eyes, "Because this doesn't stop with one gorilla," she said. The truth began to unfold in pieces. Maya had been part of a behavioral study approved on paper, but expanded in practice. Substances introduced incrementally, framed as supplements designed to test neurological response under stress. The risks had been minimized, the oversight diluted, the assumption made that no one would notice until the data was complete. But someone had noticed. Maya had noticed. Margaret sat back, stunned by the convergence of it all. The baby, the glass, the trust. This was not coincidence or desperation. It was strategy born of instinct and intelligence. Maya had understood that something inside her was wrong. She had felt her strength change, her body betray her in ways she could not correct. She had sensed the vulnerability of her child and calculated the one move left to her: expose it. Rachel felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on her shoulders. She had trusted the system because it was easier to believe it was working. Now that trust felt like negligence. Outside word spread quietly among senior staff. Security protocols tightened, not to contain Maya, but to contain information. Rachel contacted external authorities, careful to follow channels that could not be intercepted. Dr. Cole was still unaware that the ground beneath him had shifted. Margaret stood and walked to the observation window, pressing her hand lightly against the glass. Maya looked at her, eyes dark and steady. Margaret did not look away. This was no longer about a single act of maternal desperation. It was about a line that had been crossed and a cost that would not be borne quietly. The truth hidden beneath Maya's fur was not just illness, it was betrayal. And now that it had been seen, it could not be hidden again. The hardest decisions are rarely loud. They are made in silence, in the space between what a mother wants to do and what she knows she must. By the time the truth about Maya's condition began to surface, the zoo no longer felt like a place of care. It felt like a threshold, one wrong step away from losing everything that still mattered. Maya sensed the shift before anyone explained it. She felt it in the way the room changed, in the increased presence of unfamiliar humans, in the subtle tightening of procedures that surrounded her enclosure. Animals read environments the way humans read faces, and Maya understood that the balance she had carefully held was beginning to tip. Eli slept against her chest, his breath shallow but steady, and she adjusted her posture constantly, as if her body alone could shield him from whatever was approaching. Rachel Morgan had stopped sleeping. Every hour brought new information, each more disturbing than the last. The audit of Dr. Andrew Cole's files revealed layers of deception that went far beyond a single experiment. Unauthorized substances, manipulated data, quiet approvals granted under false pretenses. What began as a question of ethics had hardened into evidence of deliberate harm. Rachel moved through the zoo with a calm that bordered on brittle. She spoke carefully. She trusted selectively. The system she had devoted her career to was unraveling in her hands, and she knew exactly how institutions reacted when their reputations were threatened. They closed ranks. Dr. Cole requested an emergency transfer of Maya for specialized treatment. The language was clean, professional, deliberately vague. On paper, it looked like concern. In practice, Rachel recognized it for what it was: a removal, a disappearance disguised as procedure. If Maya left the zoo now, the evidence left with her. Rachel refused the request, citing medical instability. The response came back swiftly and coldly. Decisions were being escalated above her authority. Meetings were scheduled without her. Conversations happened behind closed doors. Time was running out. Margaret Lewis sat with Rachel late into the evening, the zoo quiet around them, the distant sounds of animals settling into night. Margaret had been allowed to stay, not officially, not documented. Rachel needed her there, if only as a reminder that this crisis was not abstract. "She knows," Margaret said softly, watching Maya through the glass. "She's been watching us since this started. She knows something is closing in." Rachel nodded. "And if they take her, they'll say it was necessary," Margaret finished, "and no one will ever see her again." The words settled heavily between them. Inside the enclosure, Maya shifted, adjusting Eli again. Her movements were slower, now more deliberate. The pain in her body was no longer something she could ignore, but she endured it without sound. Her focus never wavered from her child. Rachel made the call she had been avoiding. She sent the full file, every lab result, every altered record, every timestamp to an investigative journalist she trusted, one known for protecting sources and moving faster than bureaucracy. She contacted federal wildlife authorities through an encrypted channel. She documented her objections in writing, knowing it might cost her everything. By morning, the situation would no longer belong solely to the zoo, but Maya did not have the luxury of waiting for systems to correct themselves. The next attempt came at dawn. Security vehicles arrived without fanfare, their presence justified as routine oversight. Dr. Cole was not with them, but his influence was unmistakable. The veterinarians who accompanied the team were unfamiliar, their movements efficient and impersonal. Maya rose the moment they entered the enclosure perimeter. Her body reacted before thought could intervene. She gathered Eli closer, turning slightly away, her shoulders broad and immovable. A low sound rose from her chest, not a threat, but a warning. This was not fear. This was resolve. Rachel stepped forward, blocking the path with her own body. "You don't have clearance," she said evenly. The lead veterinarian glanced at his tablet. "We do now." Margaret felt her heart race. She watched Maya's eyes, dark and focused, track every movement. The gorilla did not charge. She did not retreat. She waited, as if measuring the distance between this moment and the last choice she had left. Rachel's radio crackled. Outside the zoo gates, news vans were arriving. The journalist had moved quickly. Confusion rippled through the security team as phone calls were made, orders questioned. The moment stretched, fragile and volatile. Maya sensed the disruption, but she did not relax. She had learned that hesitation could be fatal. This was when she did it. Slowly, deliberately, Maya turned toward the glass once more. Margaret stepped closer, instinctively, her breath catching as Maya lifted Eli. The baby stirred weakly, his small hand curling reflexively into his mother's fur. Maya's arms trembled, not from fear, but from effort. The pain in her body flared sharp and insistent, but she ignored it. She extended Eli toward the glass. The gesture was not frantic this time. It was steady, intentional, different from before. This was not a plea. It was a decision. Margaret's eyes filled with tears she did not wipe away. She understood with devastating clarity what Maya was doing. The systems around them might fail. The humans might argue. But Maya would not gamble her child's life on uncertainty. If she was taken, Eli would be taken too. If she could not protect him here, she would place him where she believed protection existed. Rachel felt the weight of the moment press into her chest. Every protocol screamed against what she was witnessing. Every rule existed to prevent this exact scenario. And yet none of those rules accounted for a mother who understood that obedience could mean death. Maya, Rachel whispered, though she knew the word itself was meaningless. "I see you." Maya's gaze locked onto hers, then shifted to Margaret. The choice was clear, not emotional, not desperate, calculated. The room held its breath. Before anyone could intervene, Rachel raised her hand sharply. "Stop," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. No one moves. She turned to the security team. "You take her now with witnesses outside and federal authorities en route, and this becomes something you can't control." The silence that followed was heavy with consequence. Maya held Eli, their arms extended for a long moment that felt endless. Margaret stood just inches away, palms open, heart pounding, knowing she could not cross the barrier even if she wanted to. Finally, Maya drew Eli back to her chest. The message had been delivered. She had made her last choice and forced everyone else to confront theirs. Within hours, the story broke. Screens filled with headlines. Questions poured in faster than answers could be managed. Federal agents arrived before sunset. Dr. Andrew Cole was escorted from the premises the following morning. Maya was not transferred. Instead, she was treated. The choice she made, born of pain, intelligence, and love, had done what no audit or complaint ever could. It had exposed the truth, halted the machinery moving against her, and secured protection not just for her child, but for others who could not speak at all. That night, as the zoo settled into uneasy quiet, Maya lay with Eli tucked beneath her chin. Her breathing was shallow but calmer now. She had done everything she could. Sometimes that is what courage looks like. Not fighting to the end, but knowing exactly when to trust and when to refuse to let go. What changed first was not the zoo, it was the silence. After the agents left and the cameras moved on, Woodland Park Zoo settled into a stillness that felt unfamiliar. The enclosures were the same, the paths were swept, the schedules resumed. But beneath the surface, something irreversible had shifted like a fault line, finally exposed after years of pressure. Maya was moved into a protected medical habitat away from public view. The space was quieter, warmer, designed for healing rather than display. She accepted the transition without resistance. Her body was tired now, weakened by illness and by the long vigilance that had kept her upright when instinct alone would have told her to collapse. Eli stayed with her. That decision, simple as it seemed, marked the first real victory. No separation for observation, no temporary holding areas, no arguments framed as policy. Mother and child remained together, their bond treated not as a variable to control, but as a condition to preserve. Margaret Lewis visited when she was allowed. She did not come every day. She did not ask for special access. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, that trust is not something you demand after it has been given once. It must be honored quietly without expectation. When she did come, she stood at a respectful distance. She did not wave. She did not press her hand to the glass. She simply waited, letting Maya decide whether acknowledgement would be offered. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. Either way, Margaret left with the same heaviness in her chest, part grief, a part gratitude. She had spent a lifetime helping people through crises that ended in either recovery or loss. This was different. This was a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful outcomes were not measured in survival alone, but in dignity. Rachel Morgan's world changed more visibly. Within weeks, internal reviews became external investigations. Oversight committees arrived. Policies that had existed largely on paper were rewritten with teeth. Research partnerships were suspended, then restructured under stricter ethical frameworks. The zoo's reputation took a public hit, but Rachel did not flinch. She testified openly. She spoke not only about falsified data and unauthorized substances, but about the danger of complacency, the way institutions slowly forget that the lives in their care are not abstract subjects, but sentient beings capable of suffering judgment and trust. Dr. Andrew Cole did not contest the charges publicly. His silence followed him out of the building and into proceedings that would unfold without spectacle. For Rachel, that silence was its own indictment. There were days she stood alone in the enclosure after hours listening to the low sounds of the animals settling for the night, wondering how close she had come to losing everything she believed her work stood for. What steadied her was the knowledge that a gorilla mother had forced her to see the truth in time. Maya's treatment was slow, careful, and transparent. The illicit compounds cleared her system gradually. The tumor responded not dramatically, not miraculously, but enough. Enough to ease the pain. Enough to give her strength back in small increments. Eli grew stronger. His movements became more purposeful. His cries grew louder, more insistent, the way healthy infants demand the world acknowledge them. He clung to Maya with renewed vigor, his small body no longer heavy with weakness, but alive with stubborn energy. Veterinarians documented his progress, meticulously aware that this child, once offered up in desperation, had become a symbol, not of tragedy, but of accountability. The public conversation shifted too. People asked harder questions, not just about one zoo or one study, but about how often animals were expected to endure in silence for the sake of progress. Letters arrived. Donations followed. Some praised Maya as a hero. Others recoiled at the idea of attributing intention to an animal. Maya did not care. She had never acted to be understood. She had acted because her child needed her to. On a gray afternoon weeks later, Margaret stood near the glass again. Maya sat on the far side, Eli nestled against her chest, his fingers wrapped securely in her fur. Their eyes met briefly. There was no urgency now, no message to deliver, just recognition. Margaret felt tears rise unbidden, not from sadness this time, but from the quiet relief that comes when trust is not betrayed. She did not stay long. As she turned to leave, she understood something she had not fully grasped before. That moment at the glass had not changed Maya's world alone. It had changed the humans who witnessed it, each in their own way. It changed how Rachel led, how Margaret listened, how the institution remembered its responsibility. And for those who had watched from a distance, it planted an unsettling question that lingered long after the headlines faded. If a gorilla mother could assess risk, recognize integrity, and place her child's life in the hands of strangers, what did that say about the intelligence we so often deny animals? And what did it demand of the humans who receive such trust? The answer was not comfortable. It required humility. Maya's trust did not create a happy ending, wrapped in certainty. Her illness remained. The world did not suddenly become ethical, but something essential had been corrected. A line redrawn, a reminder delivered without words. Trust once offered creates obligation, not just to protect what was handed over, but to change what made the risk necessary in the first place. As the seasons turned, Eli grew under Maya's watchful gaze, and in that quiet enclosure in Seattle, a mother's impossible choice continued to echo far beyond the glass, not as a spectacle, but as a challenge. To listen when the voiceless speak, to act before desperation becomes the only language left, and to prove when trust is placed in us at the most vulnerable moment that we are worthy of it. Some stories stay with us because they surprise us. Others stay because they challenge us. This one stays because it asks something deeply uncomfortable and deeply human. Maya did not speak. She did not protest. She did not have the luxury of debate paperwork or second chances. When she lifted her child toward the glass, she was not performing an act of confusion or desperation. She was making a decision based on observation, judgment, and trust. A decision rooted in the same instinct that has guided mothers across every species, culture, and century. That is the first lesson this story leaves behind. Maternal love is not abstract, and it is not exclusive to humans. It is intelligent, it is adaptive, and when pushed to its limits, it is capable of extraordinary choices. Maya assessed her situation, recognized that the system meant to protect her had failed, and sought help where she believed help still existed. That level of awareness forces us to rethink the way we talk about animals, not as passive beings driven only by instinct, but as lives shaped by perception, memory, and intention. The second lesson is harder to face. This story is not only about a gorilla mother, it is about people, about institutions, about how easily responsibility becomes diluted when procedures replace conscience. The harm done to Maya did not happen because of chaos. It happened quietly under the language of progress and authority. It happened because too many people assumed that oversight existed somewhere else, that someone else was watching closely enough. Change did not begin with policy. It began with being seen. One woman noticed something that felt wrong and refused to look away. One zookeeper chose integrity over comfort, and one animal denied a voice used the only language she had left trust. Together, they exposed a truth that systems alone could not uncover. That leads to the most important lesson of all: trust creates obligation. When Maya placed her child's life in human hands, symbolically, desperately, she created a moral debt. Not just to protect that child, but to confront the conditions that made such a choice necessary. Trust is not a gift that can be admired and then set aside. It demands action. It demands change. It demands accountability long after the moment has passed. And perhaps that is why this story resonates so deeply. Because it mirrors our own lives more than we expect. We are all at different moments the ones asking for help, and at other moments we are the ones being asked. The measure of who we are is not found in how often we are comfortable, but in how we respond when trust is placed in us at its most fragile point. Maya's story does not end with perfection. Her illness did not magically disappear. The world did not suddenly become ethical, but something real happened. A life was protected. A system was forced to look at itself. And a reminder was delivered quietly but unmistakably that compassion is not weakness, it is responsibility. If this story moved you, challenged you, or stayed with you longer than you expected, you are not alone. These are the kinds of animal stories that remind us why empathy matters. Stories that ask us to slow down, to pay attention, and to choose better when it counts. If you believe in sharing animal stories that inspire, heal, and awaken compassion across species, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue telling stories like this. Stories that don't just entertain but leave something meaningful behind. Subscribe, stay with us, and help keep these animal stories alive. Because sometimes one story is enough to change how we see the world.